When it comes to factions in World of Warcraft, it's always fun to see how aggressively connected many players are to their own affiliation. Even during Classic WoW, there are many arguments about which side is actually best. In the Burning Crusade, however, the player base pretty much unanimously agrees that one side is better than the other. Hello and welcome, I am Zabraxi. The topic of balance in general, but faction balance specifically in WoW, is a lot harder to do because there are far more variables than people tend to want to believe that there are. In Classic, for example, which is better, Alliance or Horde, it kind of changes depending on what topic you're discussing and what type of gameplay you're into. It's a bit all over the place. And with TBC though, it's definitely more one-sided, that's for sure. I want to give a huge shout out to the person who originally recommended I do a video on this topic, that being Rasmus Jensen, subscriber to the channel, so thank you very much for the idea, and I hope I do it justice, so shout out to you. Without further ado, let's go! The Classic WoW faction balance discussion has been going on since before the game even launched back in 2004. Racial abilities alone can create a pretty interesting asymmetry across the player base. Some of this can be seen as brilliant game design, while others might just chalk it up to jagged amateurity from the youth of the MMO genre. If we were to look at Alliance versus Horde in the vanilla era, and we were to try and see which is best, after all these years of theory crafting, the answer is still relatively defined, but a bit debatable. Without going too deep into the discussion, it's typically accepted that Alliance has an advantage in PvE, and PvP is a bit more of a toss-up, though Alterac Valley clearly kind of shifts the argument in favor of the Horde by about a lot. Even though Alliance has the advantage in the PvE format in Classic, it's a small amount that most people will never care or even notice. However, this changes dramatically when the TBC rolls along. Let's just get the big one out of the way. Paladins and Shamans now being able to be played across both factions immediately removes a level of asymmetry that existed for a couple years prior. Whether you believe this is a good or bad thing is an entirely separate discussion, but either way, no longer does Alliance have the benefits of Blessing of Salvation, and the Horde doesn't. However, in order to keep some level of faction identity, Blizzard implemented a unique seal for each Paladin based on their faction. Introducing Seal of Vengeance for the Alliance and Seal of Blood for the Horde. This is where most people tend to get hung up when debating faction balance. I'm not going to dump too much time into the differences here, as that can be its own video entirely because this is actually a pretty deep discussion. Essentially though, it's a bit of a trap to compare these seals equally side by side, because they just serve vastly different purposes. Seal of Vengeance is a tanking seal first and foremost. Actually, if you use Vengeance alongside other seals like Righteousness, you can accomplish some seriously insane threat, way more than any Horde Paladin is capable of. The larger argument though delves into the DPS, however. The Seal of Command is the go-to DPS seal for Alliance, but it only has a chance of actually proccing on each swing. Compare this to Seal of Blood, which guarantees activation every strike, and scales way better, and you can see where this becomes imbalanced already just at face value. On top of that, in TBC, Paladins also receive mana back when they are healed for actual missing health, a pretty cool change. And Seal of Blood damages yourself regularly, essentially guaranteeing that your mana pool stays healthy, whereas Alliance Paladins may need to use up potion cooldowns for mana. I do think the Paladin seal debate is a bit overblown, but if you're a DPS player and competitive in nature, then yeah, comparing yourself as an Alliance Paladin to any Horde Pally means you'll lose ranking every single time, which is definitely frustrating. However, I don't think the Alliance gets enough credit in the tanking realm. Alliance Paladin tanks are just better than Horde Paladin tanks overall. And that's something I also don't think gets mentioned enough. And we can't let go of Paladins just yet though. Dwarves, humans, and Draenei can all be Paladins in TBC. The human racials don't really provide much outside of sword and mace spec, but stone form from Dwarves isn't too bad as a tanking racial. I mean, it's not great, but it's also nothing to ignore either. I mean, 10% armor is pretty good. The Draenei hit racial is also pretty good. However, it's a bit wasted on a Prot or Holy Paladin, since they'll typically be in groups that won't really benefit that much from 1% hit. Tanking, maybe. A Ret Paladin, though, providing 1% hit to their melee DPS is significantly better. However, Horde Paladins are Blood Elves, and Blood Elves are completely out of control. The racial Arcane Torrent isn't just the best racial for all Paladins, but quite possibly the best racial in the game, period. This isn't just a TBC issue, by the way, as Arcane Torrent was BIS until BFA 10 years later. Having an on-demand AoE interrupt and silence that doesn't trigger diminishing returns is completely insane. While I think that the seal debate is a bit inflated like I mentioned, the outrage against Arcane Torrent isn't. It definitely isn't. Whether PvP, heroic dungeons, some raid encounters, some trash, Arcane Torrent just provides so much utility on such a small cooldown. Oh, but we're not done yet. I just mentioned the Blood Elf racial Arcane Torrent. Now, this video would be so much more interesting if, say, the Arcane Torrent racial had some alliance competition, something really good. If maybe the second best racial in PvP, especially in classic TBC, would have been something on the alliance, but no, of course not. See, the best and second best racials in classic TBC are both Horde. Because of course they are. Will of the Forsaken is a name that will make any PvP player shudder. 5 seconds of immunity from charm, fear, and sleep effects. It can also break those statuses and doesn't share a PvP trinket CD on a 2-minute cooldown. At its very weakest, it's great to force a diminishing return down one stage, and at its best, it's the 5 seconds that you need to decimate the opposing arena team. This undead racial completely blows away its alliance competition. Dwarf Stone form is as good as I mentioned earlier, but the statuses that it grants immunity from aren't anywhere near impactful. Bleeds, poisons, and diseases may hurt, sure, but Will of the Forsaken essentially stops effects that literally lock your character out of your control. Gnome's Escape Artist is pretty dang good, but again, it's only preventing movement effects such as roots and snares. These effects don't lock your character out of play like charms, fears, and sleeps. While rooted, you can at least still respond in some way, whereas when you're charmed, bro, yeah, you're just standing there looking stupid. Now, this tends to be where most people call it quits with racial abilities because, I mean, well, honestly, we've already had enough to prove the point that Horde has a favor here between Blood Elf and Undead. However, there's still another change that comes in the TBC that many people need to be made aware of. The Orc racial hardiness finally receives that nerf, coming from a 25% stun resist to 15%. Now, before all of you Alliance jump for joy, though, this nerf also comes with a pretty good buff. Blood Fury is now also altered to increase spell damage as well as healing power. I've kind of always considered this to just be that change intended to kick people while they're down. When it comes down to competitive play and min-maxing, though, there's no question about which faction is king during the Burning Crusade. Horde reigns supreme in so many areas that it's almost exhausting. The effects of this faction shift can still be felt to this day, as Shadowlands is overwhelmingly played with a Horde bias. However, I can't say that I expect this to actually matter too much in terms of population balance, though, at least not initially. Just as in vanilla, it doesn't seem that too many people are willing to forfeit all that time they've put into their alliance characters to just suddenly change to Horde and completely restart from scratch. For some, this radical asymmetry is the biggest scar of the Burning Crusade. For most, though, I think it'll be an annoyance, or at least a good excuse as to when you're an alliance player and you lose to Horde in Arena, you can blame faction imbalance. So should Blizzard do anything about this? Well, they're damned if they do, and they're damned if they don't. While many people have given up on the whole no changes debate, there's still a limit to what people seem to be accepting of. For many, the fact that Seal of Blood and Vengeance exist as faction-based abilities is one of the last remaining elements of faction identity. Should Blizzard introduce the human everyman for himself racial early into TBC, despite that it wasn't there originally? I mean, this creates its own problems, as that racial is by far the best racial ability probably ever created in WoW, so that can't be the solution. Blizzard has to be careful not to change too much, as to betray the spirit of the original. But something does need to be done, even if simple and boring. Providing Seal of Vengeance and Blood to each faction definitely does help solve this problem. It allows the Alliance Ret Paladins to compete with Blood Elves, while now also allowing Horde Paladins to generate the same threat as their Alliance counterparts. The idea of faction identity through classes and class design, I mean, is basically dead in TBC anyway, with Paladins and Shamans now being available to the Alliance and the Horde. Will of the Forsaken being nerfed also probably wouldn't be too much of a problem here. If Will of the Forsaken had a 5-minute CD now, it would still be arguably the best PvP racial in the game, and yet it's that nerf that it desperately needs. Let's also just not forget Arcane Torrent, though honestly, I think the skill is really awesome, so I actually wouldn't change it that much, but a simple 5-minute CD up from 2 would allow its functionality to still be useful, but less prevalent in PvE. However, the infinitely larger hole that needs to be plugged would be to actually make Arcane Torrent trigger DR on silence effects. The fact that it doesn't already honestly just feels like a bug or oversight. There are still so many more variables and things we could talk about when it comes to faction balance, especially in classic TBC, but I needed to set the stage somehow. I needed to get a starting point, and that's what this video is essentially for. If you are more interested in continuing down this topic, I'm down to see if I can really extrapolate more from it. And I think there's some pretty cool things that Blizzard could do balance-wise, but it would require changes, but who knows. If you did like the video, please hit that like button and subscribe. I'm about to pass my main variety gaming channel. I mean, I'm a small content creator. I've never really been able to do this full-time or done it full-time, but I've spent on and off like 10 years almost on that other channel, like not actively, but it's funny that I'm about to surpass it in like 4 months from this. You guys have seriously been incredible, so thank you. It's so humbling. But please feel free to stick around for more. If you thought I sucked and you're really mad that I'm happy, hit that dislike button and tell me how much you hate me. I'm cool with that too. Sometimes the dislike comments, sometimes they're more interesting than the good ones, so I'll take it. But that's it from me. You've been awesome, and until the next one, I'm out. Bye-bye!